To go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight, but tonight it's with me, Andrew Doyle. In the big question, should the Northern Irish Protocol be abolished? We'll also be discussing this week's rail strikes and how it has affected Armed Forces Day. In the news agenda, following comments made by Prince Charles yesterday, is it the beginning of the end for the Commonwealth? And why do so many men have so few friends? Those two aren't linked. Reacting to those stories are my fantastic panel. I've got former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik, royal expert and celebrity psychologist Dr. Arthur Cassidy, and political commentator Alice Grant. I'll see you after the headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Andrew, thank you. The top stories this hour: the Prime Minister has hailed an inspiring and uplifting few days in Rwanda. That comes as the UK announces plans to support marginalised groups abroad and help tackle global challenges. Following a double by-election defeat, Boris Johnson continues to defend his leadership after responding to recent criticisms. But he says voters want to hear about the issues that affect them and less about any mistakes he may have made.
Things are tough. Of course, people are going to rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think, to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
In other news today, the boss of the RMT has accused the Transport Secretary of talking nonsense after the minister tweeted what he called outdated working practices in the railway industry. Grant Shapps said the strikes are damaging to commuters and the economy. Mick Lynch has not ruled out further industrial action. But a fifth of train service have been running today on a third day of walkouts this week. That as thousands of rail workers protested over jobs, pay and conditions. In the United States, President Joe Biden has signed in historic new gun safety legislation. Republicans and Democrats agreed a deal following the Texas school massacre and a string of other mass shootings in America. The new measures strengthen background checks for the youngest buyers of weapons and increase funding for mental health and school safety programs. To Ukraine now, where the authorities say Russian forces have taken full control of the eastern city of Severodonetsk. It's Ukraine's biggest defeat in the war after the city suffered weeks of bombardment. Most of the Luhansk region now is under Russian control. And UK intelligence chiefs believe President Putin has replaced several generals since the start of the war, including the commander of his airborne forces. Here, Armed Forces Day has been marked up and down the country, including a display from the RAF's Red Arrows team, who took to the skies. Earlier, HMS Prince of Wales returned to Portsmouth Naval Base after completing NATO exercises off the Spanish coast. And for those watching on television, the scenes today in Scarborough by the seaside as veterans marched alongside the promenade. Also, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have today marked the day by paying tribute to all those who've served their country, both here and abroad. And Sir Paul McCartney will shortly be making history when he becomes Glastonbury Festival's oldest solo headliner. His set due to start at 9:30 tonight, the former Beatle taking to the stage exactly 1 week after celebrating his 80th birthday. A large crowd started to gather earlier on this afternoon as fans secured their places at Worthy Farm ahead of hearing classic hits from throughout Sir Paul McCartney's epic career. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's time for Mark Dolan Tonight with Andrew Doyle.
Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Andrew Doyle. In tonight's big question, should the Northern Irish Protocol be abolished? The second reading of the government's Northern Ireland Protocol Bill is expected to take place at Westminster on Monday. In the news agenda, after Prince Charles gave his blessing to countries severing ties with the monarchy, is this the beginning of the end for the Commonwealth? Also, the new war on motorists. Should you fail an exam for wearing a watch? And why do men have so few friends? Reacting to these stories and with me throughout the show is my wonderful all-star panel of former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik, royal expert and celebrity psychologist Dr. Arthur Cassidy, and political commentator Alice Grant. And I want to hear from you throughout the show. Don't be shy. Drop us an email. That's at gbviews@gbnews.uk. Get in touch and we're going to read out some of the best ones throughout the show. So for the next 2 hours, big debates, big guests, and always big opinions. Let's start with this one. A few years ago, I was invited to deliver a presentation to the International Politics Society at Aberystwyth University. The academics in the politics department weren't too happy that the students had invited me, and they refused to attend and even refused to publicise the event on the grounds that my talk would be antagonistic to woke culture and would therefore violate their departmental ethos of promoting diversity. Now, I'm not opposed to diversity. My talk wasn't even about diversity, so it's difficult to see why they had a problem. It would seem they were simply unhappy that someone who didn't share their precious ideological worldview might be speaking on their turf. It would seem that diversity of opinion was not their priority. Still, the students were fantastic. They were open-minded, they were keen to be challenged, and to be honest, we were probably better off without some po-faced academics sitting there scowling and tutting like a bunch of Victorian matrons. After this event, I reflected on why is it that so many people in positions of authority at universities, schools, libraries and other institutions are so afraid of debate and discussion. I've never been no-platformed, but a lot of feminists have, and I can't help noticing that it tends to happen more to women than to men. And today, there was another example. Nottingham City Council has issued a statement saying that it has cancelled a talk at Aspley Library by the feminist author and journalist Julie Bindel. According to the statement, this is due to the speaker's views on transgender rights being at odds with aspects of the council's equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. What can this mean? Julie Bindel has been campaigning for women's rights since she was 17 years old. She is not transphobic, has never opposed the notion of equality, diversity or inclusion. As the Labour MP Rosie Duffield tweeted today, a library banning a woman writer with a history of writing about women's rights. How very progressive. Now, I've read the council's strategy, which is available online, and there's no indication that the promotion of women's rights would be a violation. And that's just as well, because after the case of Maya Fuss-Starter, the tax expert who was wrongfully dismissed by her employers for expressing her view that biological sex is immutable and important, the High Court ruled in June 2021 that what have become known as gender-critical views are in fact protected by law. By cancelling Julie Bindel's event at Aspley Library because of her protected beliefs, it does seem likely that Nottingham City Council are engaging in unlawful discrimination. They've certainly opened themselves up to the possibility of legal action. But let's leave aside the legality of the council cancelling an event because they happen to disagree with the views of the speaker. Where does this leave employees of the council? What if the employees of the council happen to agree with Julie Bindel? Are they to be fired? Or maybe the message is simply that they should just keep their mouths shut. The journalist Janice Turner asked the key question. She said, does Nottingham City Council vet the views of all speakers at their civic venues? Or just feminists? They've cancelled a lesbian speaker during Pride because they're signed up to Stonewall. We did invite someone from Nottingham Council onto the show, but they haven't as yet got back to us. But it will be interesting to see how this case develops. If they are taken to task for unlawful discrimination, maybe that will send a message to other institutions, reminding them of the importance of plurality of opinion, and that however much they try to silence those who argue for the importance of women's sex-based rights, they're not going to succeed. In the end, Julie Bindel held her event in the street. Because people aren't so easily cowed, particularly when it comes to expressing their views on the issues that matter most to them. Julie Bindel, by the way, has never claimed that she is entitled to a platform. What she objects to, and rightly so, is how often she is invited to speak at an event, and then protesters put pressure onto the event organisers until it is pulled. I'm all for the right to peacefully protest. But why don't activists who object to a speaker's views simply turn up and engage in the discussion? Why do they feel the need to harass and intimidate people who don't comply? Witnesses at Aspley Library heard some of the protesters who turned up say that they were there to stop the appearance of Julie Burchill. Two of them apparently told Julie Bindel that she was Julie Burchill. But Julie Bindel is not Julie Burchill. She's a completely different Julie. They're both journalists, they have the same initials, but the similarity ends there. So these protesters didn't even know who it was they were protesting about. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's about power. There's nothing new about authoritarians trying to decide who gets to speak and who doesn't. Well, someone ought to remind Nottingham City Council that we still have a thing called freedom of speech in this country. And if they're going to start demanding that everyone thinks the same as they do, some of us are going to resist. I'll get the thoughts of my panel in just one moment. But first, I am joined by Lucy Massoud, barrister at Staple Inn Chambers. Lucy, thanks ever so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you first about this. This is something that is happening again and again, but particularly relating to this issue of feminists with their gender-critical views. This seems to be the one thing that seems to cause the most trouble. Why is that?
Who knows? I think essentially it boils down to male entitlement and male rights activists wanting to stamp on the rights of women. I mean, if we look at what happened today, Julie Bindel is a well-respected lesbian feminist of working class origin who's been campaigning for the rights of women and girls for over 4 decades. Now, there are few people in this country who have championed women's rights more so than Julie Bindel. Yet she finds herself being banned from speaking in a public building, and all in the name of inclusivity. Now, this event that she was due to speak at was a sold-out event, and she was there to speak to her audience about the subject of male violence and the impact that male violence has on women and girls. Now, you would think any council across the country would welcome such an event, and instead what we see is Nottingham City Council being convinced by a very tiny number of trans activists that once again women should be silenced. And I would ask Nottingham City Council and those trans activists who succeeded in having this event cancelled today, what do they actually think they achieved today, apart from monstering a feminist who spent decades fighting for the rights of women and girls? This is utterly a disgraceful decision by Nottingham City Council, and they should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, it's also counterproductive from the protesters' point of view, because here we are talking about it. This would have been a small event, but now it's going to blow up and more people are going to hear the message that Julie Bindel wanted to take to that talk, to that event in Nottingham. But can I ask you about this? Because I've got the statement from Nottingham City Council, and this is the reason they give. They say, Nottingham is an inclusive city, and as a council, we support our LGBT community and have committed to supporting trans rights as human rights through Stonewall. We did not want the use of one of our library buildings for this event, taking place during Pride Month, to be seen as implicit support for views held by the speaker, which fly in the face of our position on transgender rights. Now, that's interesting to me, because Julie Bindel hasn't said anything transphobic, does not oppose equal rights for trans people. It just seems like it's as though they haven't even engaged with the arguments of the person that they're seeking to ban.
Well, it's interesting that they mentioned Stonewall in their statement, and that, for me, really says it all, because Stonewall seems to have an issue at the moment with people who are same-sex attracted, with people who believe in biology, and you have councils across the country, and unfortunately many of them are Labour-run, and I say that as a member of the Labour Party, who seem to take the word of Stonewall as gospel. Now, the irony is, Andrew, that yesterday we saw women in the United States have their rights stripped away from them. And today we see a Labour-run council think it's a good idea to strip the rights away from women who intended to meet and speak about a topic that was of interest to them and mattered to them. Now, I'm no discrimination lawyer, but for me, the actions of Nottingham City Council do appear to be a clear case of discrimination. And I really do hope that Julie Bindel or the organisers of the event or both seriously consider taking action against Nottingham City Council, because now women need to stand up to these bullies, and we need to send them a clear signal that we will no longer be silenced simply to indulge the feelings of the gender identity mafia.
Lisa Missou, thanks very much for joining me. I'd like to bring in my panel at this point, former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik, royal expert and celebrity psychologist Dr Arthur Cassidy, and political commentator Alice Grant. Lembit, can I come to you first? A lot of, as my guest pointed out, a lot of the opposition to feminists and those with gender-critical views seems to be coming from the left, even though these feminists themselves are pretty much to a person left-wing. Do you understand what's going on here?
I understand what's going on, but I don't think it's about left-right. It's about authoritarian, libertarian. I got involved in politics because I fiercely believe in liberty, in the right to free speech, in the right to say things that could offend or disturb other people. Now, what seems to be happening here, as far as I can see at least, Andrew, is people think they win by shutting you up. Now, we see exactly the same thing in the environmental debate. If these people have the arguments that they think they have, why are they so scared to share them? I've always promoted the idea of having reasoned debate, having disagreements, even respecting that sometimes you can't get to the same place in a debate. But what doesn't work for me in a free society is when you actually shut up the debate from the beginning. That's what's going on here. And it's perverse, actually, without me having to really spell this out. It's almost like they're scoring an own goal, because the very people they're trying to defend are actually potentially going to be pariahed as a result of the position that the council has taken. It's an insane way to actually promote free speech, because it's nothing of the sort.
Alice Grant, can I come to you next? Do you think there are certain views that we should not platform or not tolerate, or should we just allow all views to be aired so that we can thrash it out in the marketplace of ideas?
Well, I'm a complete believer in open debate, and I think this is a case, once again, in which we see the silencing of a dissenting voice, which, in fact, is actually unlawful. So gender-critical views are now protected by law, and Nottingham Council have acted literally unlawfully to try to silence someone from speaking about but actually based nothing on this particular issue, but just simply because of views that this lady, Julie Bindel, held. So I'm quite shocked as a young woman to see this happening, and I think they're really trying to push a climate of fear on young women and on us being able to speak our voice.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned this being a sort of alternative view, but actually the view that there is such a thing as biological sex, and that biological sex is actually quite key to gay rights and women's rights. That's not a fringe view at all. That's the view of the vast majority of people. So this is what strikes me as a bit odd. Dr. Cassidy, do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, yes, I do, because I'm becoming far, far more confused week by week the more I hear about transgender. Look, I am an ex-academic, and I've been working on identity for many years, including women feminists. Now, one of the things that troubles me most is that these are based on social constructionism. And we're beginning to find, I find this, by the way, Andrew, amongst many health practitioners, they're beginning to wonder what is the most effective therapeutic procedure to help people who are even transitioning. And I was speaking not too long ago to an academic who was a feminist, and she said to me, where will this debate really end? Are we continuing to create more and more derivations of what is originally created as male and female? So it's quite simple, academically and theologically and otherwise, and politically, to have male and female, and also to have masculinity and femininity. I see no reason why we should have to be very radical left-wing feminists. Absolutely none whatsoever. I don't know where this is going to end. And by the way, I could just mention on this point, Andrew, I have been working in my mental health charity back in Northern Ireland, and I have seen in the past 3 years 3 women and 1 guy who have presented as part of the transition process with very severe psychological disturbance, because they have a tremendous fear of really not being able to carry this through. And the therapeutic aspect seemed to be really, will this help me? Can I see the therapeutic procedure through to the end? Can I become what I want to become? And so there's ultimate confusion about the transitioning process. And by the way, I just noticed, looking at some cross-cultural research recently on transgenderism, The suicide rate, by the way, moves cross-culturally between 32% and 50%, all right? What we have to look at here is I have brought 3 young women back from suicidal behaviour, gladly, through what we do in our charity. But the other aspect is that there has been a decrease in women who are completing suicide simply because they are much more vulnerable than men are. Men are also vulnerable, but women, we know, are more vulnerable than men. But through emotional regulation, we can bring them back. So there has been a decrease cross-culturally throughout Europe and through North America. Men, by the way, are still...
the issue of gender?
Well, gender really still becomes as a social construction, you know, and what do we mean by feminism?
With all of these, I mean, we're talking about, differences of opinion around the issues of gender and the complexity surrounding these issues. But surely that means that we need more discussion, not less discussion. I mean, wouldn't that be right? Len Opik, what do you think?
Absolutely. My view is that you can never go wrong with the truth. And sometimes the truth is obscure, and sometimes we have different interpretations, exactly as you've had, because we have different, perhaps, moral assumptions. When it goes horribly wrong, and I completely agree with Alice on this, is when you suppress the chance to have the debate. This will massively confuse people who are already confused about their gender identity. They're going to be scared because they think, well, if I'm going to share this or that, I'm going to be cancelled. And then, perhaps even more profoundly, it seems to me there's an underlying danger in our society, I mentioned the environment before, where you do get cancelled if you don't follow the mainstream. Now, that's counter to everything I went into politics to do. The only reason we actually got, and we'll talk about this later probably in the show, some peace in Northern Ireland, is because people who maybe even hated each other and hated each other's views sat in a room and shared those opinions.
Yeah.
Are we going to cancel that opportunity in gender politics? I sincerely hope not.
And just quickly before the break, Alice, I mean, it doesn't look as though those kind of discussions that Lembit's suggesting we need to have are ever going to happen when it comes to this particular debate.
Yes, yeah, it's a lot like, in fact, the climate alarmism that we're seeing as well, in which the kind of small minority who have the largest platform and the loudest voices shouting down to the rest of the majority of British people who are very sensible and have very sensible views on these subjects. These are the people who are just using methods of silencing debate or of just really silly kind of publicity stunts in order to draw attention to themselves, and actual, honest, open debate is being neglected because when the truth and the facts are presented, it is clear that these people are of an extremist opinion and do not reflect the majority of how British people think and feel towards these subjects.
Well, there's a lot to go into there, but we don't have time at the moment. We're going to have to go to a break now. But coming up after the break, in tonight's big question, should the Northern Irish Protocol be abolished? See you in a minute.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories.
It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers.
Yeah. We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Andrew Doyle. And you've been getting in touch. Thanks ever so much for sending in your emails. Keep them coming. We've got one here from Paul. Paul says any member who wishes to leave the Commonwealth should be allowed to without hindering. Any member who wants to stay should stay. But it should not be decided by the government or politicians of that land, but by the peoples via a referendum. How very nicely democratic of you. Michael now says the majority of people and politicians in Northern Ireland support the protocol. The Tories want it abolished because the Northern Irish economy is outperforming Great Britain. Interesting theory. Now we've got Tom. Tom says, I would point out the discussion that was banned at a Nottingham library was on stopping male violence against women. Who opposes this exactly? I say that as a man. Well, quite. It's an interesting one. It's an interesting topic that the City Council would seek to ban. Very strange indeed, but anyway, I'm sure we'll be coming back to that at some point. But it's time now for the big question, in which we tackle a major news story of the day. A second reading of the government's Northern Ireland Protocol Bill is expected to take place at Westminster on Monday. The bill will allow ministers to override parts of the protocol, the post-Brexit trading arrangements for Northern Ireland. It has been heavily criticised by the EU and the Irish government. To discuss this is unionist activist, writer and commentator Jamie Bryson and Erwin Armstrong, a healthcare executive. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining me. So I'm going to come to you first, Jamie, if you don't mind. Should the protocol be just abolished?
Absolutely. The protocol represents the greatest threat to the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom that there has ever been since the Act of Union. And if you ask the question, what is the United Kingdom as a legal construct, it is the Act of Union. To put it simply, the Act of Union is the Union. And the effect of the Northern Ireland Protocol, it has been held by the Court of Appeal in Northern Ireland, is to subjugate the Act of Union. So that's constitutionally intolerable. It cuts Northern Ireland off from the United Kingdom. It subjugates the Act of Union, and it leaves Northern Ireland almost trapped within an economic united Ireland. And that's totally intolerable for anybody who values the Union. So the protocol must be entirely dismantled.
Do you share the view that Lord Frost expressed, that Boris Johnson knew that this agreement was fundamentally flawed when he entered into it, and that actually this was always going to aggravate the unionist population? And why on earth wouldn't he have thought of this in advance?
Well, that's a very good question, but how could he not know? How could he misunderstand that he was putting the border in the Irish Sea, that he was leaving one sovereign part of the United Kingdom subject to a foreign VAT regime, foreign courts, foreign laws, and being incrementally moved apart from the United Kingdom. So, he has access to the best lawyers, he has access to the best advisors. So it's just fantasy stuff to say the Prime Minister did not know. And by the way, people like me, people like the DUP, made it very, very clear the constitutional implications of the protocol, and the British government ignored it. In fact, the Secretary of State in January 2020, Brandon Lewis, pretended there was no border in the Irish Sea. So I suppose if from a grassroots unionist and loyalist perspective, if there's one thing we have achieved, it is to bring the government to the point of realising actually the seriousness of the situation which they have caused.
I can't go to Erwin Armstrong because I'm afraid he's back with us at the moment. Erwin, can I ask you your feelings on this? Do you think that there is any advantages to the protocol and keeping it in place as it currently stands?
Well, I think firstly, 25 years ago approximately, we voted for the Good Friday Agreement. 70% of people for it. That took the constitutional position of Northern Ireland out of the politician. Actually gave it to the people of Northern and Southern Ireland. So any change in the constitutional position will be decided by the people. It won't be decided by politicians in London or Belfast. So I think you have to bear that in mind at the beginning. So on the protocol, I do not think it should be abolished. I think it needs to be substantially improved. But I do think the access that we have...
I'm sorry, Owen, I think we're losing you. I'm afraid you're dropping out there. So I'm going to have to come back to Jamie for the time being. Do you think, Jamie Bryson, that there is the possibility that the EU's threats of a trade war are valid, and actually that we do have something to fear in that respect, don't we?
Well, is the United Kingdom going to be bullied into allowing part of its sovereign territory to be subjugated? And just to come back on one issue, the last contributor stated in relation to the principle of consent, he talked about the Belfast Agreement and constitutional change. It's hard to imagine any more substantive constitutional change than the subjugation of the very fundamental basis of the Union itself in the form of the Act of Union. So there has been constitutional change. And the question here is, if the principle of consent, which is meant to protect Northern Ireland's constitutional position, is to mean anything, then it has to protect the substance of the Union. You can't salami slice the Union piece by piece, change everything but the last thing, as I would put it, the last thing being merely the final formal handover of sovereignty. So the protocol has had that effect. So look, the EU can issue all sorts of threats, but ultimately what has to come first here is the United Kingdom and the Union itself. And that is a question for every Conservative MP and peer, I suppose, when it goes to the House of Lords, is do they value the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Because if they vote against the protocol bill, then they're voting to ensure that one part of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland, is subjugated under the jackboot of this protocol, and that's just a constitutional abomination.
Are you not slightly concerned about the possibility of the reintroduction of a hard border on the island? Insofar as, I know that Boris Johnson is claiming that absolutely won't happen. Liz Truss is saying there will be no need for a border. But a lot of critics are saying that it is a possibility. Would that not concern you?
Not at all. I mean, so be it. If we are to respect the principle of consent meaning anything, it means that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, and that means that there is an international border between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and that international border is on the island of Ireland. So the starting point should be this. If there's to be a border, then the border should be where it belongs, between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Now, if we start from that position and we can find solutions to work backwards to make that light touch, to make sure that doesn't have to happen, then all well and good. But I mean, as a unionist, I'm not going to be crying any tears if there's a hard land border. They can build a wall for all I care, because the nationalist community in Northern Ireland had no concern whenever the hard border was being put up in the Irish Sea. So this is a contradiction here, in that apparently to protect the Belfast Agreement, there can be no border on the island of Ireland, but it's entirely apparently consistent with the Belfast Agreement to put a border between Northern Ireland and GB.
But I understand your point of view on this, but you must concede surely that building a wall between Ireland and Northern Ireland would have security implications and could lead to a resurgence of the Troubles.
Well, it was a flippant comment in that sense, and I'm sure you'll appreciate it as such. But the point I'm making is that if there has to be a land border, then so be it. The United Kingdom would be entitled to police that border however they see fit. I mean, it's not an ambition that we want to see a hard border, but ultimately, if there has to be a border somewhere, and the choice is between a land border and a sea border, then the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom dictates that there should be a land border, and put it where no other sovereign country in the world would partition their own country on the basis that if we put a border where it belongs, other persons might engage in terrorism. I mean, that gives a veto to those who would threaten terrorism, and that can't be tolerable in any democratic society.
Well, Jamie Bryson, thank you very much for joining me. I'd like to bring in my panel at this point, because this is obviously a very contentious issue. Yes, I accept he was being flippant about the brick wall, but actually he was making the point that a hard border wouldn't bother him at all. Isn't there an issue there, Lembit?
Let's get the context. I was Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland for 10 years, and 2/3 of your panel grew up in Northern Ireland, so I'm not saying we're experts, but we've seen it from the inside. It's a non-starter to have a hard border on the island of Ireland. Cannot be done. The 10 years I spent helping to negotiate the peace process, I only had a small part in it, but it was, I guess, important, made it absolutely clear that you cannot put that border back in. This is about two things, about trade and trust.
Yes.
Trust on the basis that if everyone tells the truth, you don't need to police the border, and I guess you'll have contraband and so on if it's not a hard border and there are different rules. And then there's trade. Now, the trade point's more important because the North and the South have very clearly established conditions. Now, I completely understand any unionist who says they don't like those conditions. They don't want it to be a single market. And that's fair enough, but I don't think you can renegotiate that. And then we get to the priorities. The problem here isn't what you've just heard from your unionist contributors. The problem is Boris Johnson has completely mucked up the negotiation with Europe.
Yes.
But if he got that right, if we had a kind of workable trade deal, then this wouldn't really be happening. But he hasn't delivered that. And this is the problem writ large, which could, as you suggested, destabilise the entire peace process.
Aren't his proposals workable, though? I mean, this idea that you have what he calls a green lane of checks so that goods can be exported from Britain to Northern Ireland, but then the red lane, if they to go on to the Republic, that seems like a workable situation. You wouldn't necessarily need a hard border to implement that.
In theory, that can work. But it's not what was agreed. And one side, i.e. the UK, cannot renegotiate this on its own. The European Union ended up pretty heavily involved in the peace process. And just let's remember, the Republicans have every right to be annoyed if it looks like a unilateral change, because that will provoke them. And let's also remember that, by default, the Republicans won the most recent election in the north of Ireland. That's got to count for something in terms of democracy.
But it's a power-sharing situation, so
yes,
you need both sides.
It is, but if you believe in democracy, they've got, although they stayed where they were and the Unionists went backwards, technically, they have the most number of seats. Are we just going to disregard that? I don't think that's a smart move.
OK, Dr Cassidy. Oh, sorry, we'll come to you in a minute. Go on, yes, so go, Alice.
But as for now, we are still a United Kingdom. And, you know, regardless of the exact political situation in Northern Ireland, we do have to respect the fact that we are Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And it just seems ridiculous that there is literally a partition in our United Kingdom.
That seems to be the problem, isn't it? It's constitutional
I would
issue.
say, though, I do agree that I think the way Boris Johnson negotiated this withdrawal agreement is hugely problematic, and it should be repudiated, the Northern Ireland Protocol. But the idea that, you know, Northern Ireland are now facing custom checks and, you know, effectively are in a really difficult situation because of just, you know, a complete lack of competence, I think, in negotiating, as Westminster really cowed to the threats from the EU and from Leo Varadkar, who was even threatening violence, potentially.
Well, it was implicit. I don't think it really...
well,
implicit threats are the worst. That can be the most frightening.
I think you've got to be very careful.
I wouldn't trust any politicians who start using scaremongering and fearmongering tactics, especially leading to violence, which is just quite unbelievable.
Dr Cassidy, do you think there's an issue? Do you think that the guest that I had, Jamie Bryson, has a point?
But he does have, and I come from the Ulster Protestant tradition. I'm proud to be British. I have a British passport. And whilst I understand, and I also concord with what Olympic analysis said, by the way, I think Boris his naivety about this, he doesn't really understand the intricacy of political machinations in Northern Ireland or political identities in Northern Ireland. And I've been working in political identities for some time as an academic. And I feel that had he really, and I think we were talking about this, Olympic, over coffee, I think that if he were to really stand back and listen to his advisors and listen to the people on the ground and say, look, British Protestant identities are important to Northern Ireland and to the protocol. And if he feels that we're going to scrap the protocol or the bulk of this, then I'm terrified to see what's going to happen in Brussels. You know, how are they going to retaliate?
Yeah.
And there's no place in political, you know, because what will happen here, we'll get social, political and economic disequilibrium crumbing right in full force. On top of that, retaliation by Brussels. I don't want to think what will be happening.
Bring you in first, Leb.
This is really interesting, because I think Brussels is playing a dangerous game. I think you're absolutely on the money here.
Yeah.
They're so determined to show that Brexit was bad and they want to punish Italy or Greece or anybody else will do it. They want to make this as difficult as possible. Now, I think that Boris is culpable. I think that Alice is right. He didn't do a good job of this. And I also think you're dead right. Boris doesn't really understand the issues. He's not a bad bloke. But most people, when I spent a decade in politics in Westminster talking about this, most politicians from the mainland didn't understand the Northern Ireland.
But you're dealing with a situation where you have two disparate groups of people who are never going to agree on the fundamental issues. So for the Unionists, this is a constitutional crisis, and they're going to be very, very... And it's the issue that seemed to have united Unionists more than any other. So, I mean, how can you resolve this, Alice?
Well, yeah, the situation is hugely difficult, but I do not think it's being helped by the kind of, the very, almost hateful extreme tactics used by the Republicans, because they are not approaching this issue in a way which is peaceful or understanding. But I feel like they're very belligerent, and from my experience, they've just been, incredibly combative and not very open to...
Would you say the same about the EU, though?
Yes, absolutely.
Is there threatening legal action?
Yes, yeah. I mean, oh, well, that's very typical of the EU, of course, as we know.
I mean, Libby's probably right. They're trying to punish anyone who dared to break away.
The EU are just the biggest bullies, I think, we can see on the geopolitical scale.
Just in terms of the point he's making about the Republicans, I've worked with them a lot, and the problem they've got, the big thing, I can summarise it in a 10-second sentence. They're worried that you're going to get disequality again. They've spent decades trying to get parity of esteem with the loyalist and Protestant community, and this looks like a regressive move. That's what frightens them.
Let's just quickly, I believe we can bring back Owen Armstrong, who we had technical issues earlier. Owen, can you hear me now?
I can hear you fine.
Fantastic. Would you like to give us your view on this? Can you see any advantages to sustaining the protocol as it currently stands?
There are three viewpoints on the protocol. One is constitutional, one is cultural, and one is economic. And in my mind, economic success in Northern Ireland is what will actually bring the people of Northern Ireland together. If we can actually start to make Northern Ireland work. And there is no doubt in my mind that there are parts of the protocol that will allow that to happen. The fact that we can export to GB and EU is very beneficial. In my own company, it's been very beneficial to us. And I think people, it doesn't matter where you go in the world, are interested in the education, they're interested in health, they're interested in a good job. And my understanding is that the number of companies applying to come to Northern Ireland due to the protocol has increased fourfold since it was introduced. So I can see an extremely bright future for Northern Ireland. You know, we could become the Singapore of Europe.
Owen, can I just ask you on that point, though? Because you mentioned the economic advantages of the protocol, but I think that possibly underestimates the strength of feeling just on a pure matter of principle of having a hard border down the Irish Sea. I mean, you know, again and again throughout history, the capacity of unionists to gather on matters of principle. If you think of the Sunningdale Agreement in 1973, if you think of the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985, it's not necessarily about what's going to make them better off. It's about the principle of their nationality, isn't it?
No, I did say there were good parts to the protocol, and there are difficult parts to the protocol. And I think the earlier contributors pointed out the intransigence of the EU trying to use Northern Ireland as a pawn in the Brexit game. And I think we need to get away from that. We need to get into negotiations to get rid of the parts of the agreement that don't work, i.e., if I want to order something from the UK under the protocol, it has to go through a complete customs agreement, even if it's one of the big shopping channels or anything. That needs to go. If it's coming to Northern Ireland to stay here, then there shouldn't be any paperwork. If it's coming to Northern Ireland to go elsewhere in the EU, then that's a very different matter, where you're just being used as a transit point. And that is not the border, in my mind, in the Irish Sea, if it's transiting through Northern Ireland to somewhere else. So I think we can get the parts of the protocol removed that are doing the damage. And I think the EU has gone a long way down that road now. They actually are talking about green channels and red channels, which I don't think we don't need a green channel, which sort of suggests that you need to go through some sort of process. If it's coming here, it's coming here, and you don't need to go through any paperwork. We have a massive advantage in that we ship quite freely to GB or Ireland or the mainland Europe without paperwork. And that is a big, big advantage to anybody who's doing that. But we do have other things to sort out in Northern Ireland, like productivity. That is very low. Our economically inactive are very high. And in fact, if we could sort those two problems out just to GB levels, it would release 80,000 people into the job market in Northern Ireland, in a market where unemployment is currently 2.9%. And we are finding difficulties. And I know there are many other companies in Northern Ireland finding difficulties in actually getting employees. In fact, one of the things that happened in Brexit was the block in people coming from the EU. That was a major mistake. We should manage it, but we shouldn't have stopped people coming from the EU. We actually need them, certainly in Northern Ireland. And I think in the rest of GB as well, it was very good for our economy.
Well, Owen Armstrong, I'm really glad that we were able to talk to you eventually. Thank you for joining me tonight. I'll just quickly bring in my panel just one more time. I just want to make this point because I think Owen Armstrong's talking very much about the advantages and the potential economic advantages. But there is this matter of principle. Apparently, in the last 18 months, we've had 4,000 new laws implemented by the EU in Northern Ireland, and yet the UK voted to leave the EU. How is that acceptable, Alice?
I mean, one of the most important reasons for the vote to leave was precisely because of EU directives coming in by the thousands each year and just trampling over British law in many cases. So the idea that EU law is being applied to an area of the United Kingdom is just simply untenable.
Well, it's going to make people angry, isn't it? That's the point, Dr. Caster. Don't you think? I mean, that's the thing, the principle of it, irrespective of how good it might be for the economy.
Totally, and I totally agree with what Alice said, because, I mean, why do we have to be subjugated to European law and legislation of human rights?
We voted to leave. That was a democratic voice being made clear.
And it's not just that, it's the European Court of Justice having the final say on trade disputes.
The two parts to it. On the one side, it's right. We left the EU partly, whether you agreed with it or not, that was the majority decision.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't now be subject, no part of the UK should be subject to those laws. Second point is, the people of Northern Ireland really suffered for decades because of the Troubles. I think it would be fair enough to say, as you've just heard, let them trade in the European Union and in the UK. It's a kind of payback after 1.5 million people have really suffered. Who's going to be harmed by that if there are 550 million people on the continent? And that's when we get back to the point, it's pretty spiteful of Brussels to be so intransigent. But no thanks to Boris either, who maybe provoked them.
Right, well, that's what our panel thinks. What do you think? We've been running a poll on Twitter. Should the Northern Ireland Protocol be abolished? 57% of you say yes, and 43% of you say no. And as we know, Twitter polls are binding. So that solved that. Fantastic news. Coming up after the break, how have the rail strikes impacted Armed Forces Day? We'll see you in just 1 minute.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan tonight. You're not hallucinating. It's me, Andrew Doyle. I'm sitting in for Mark for a while. And you've all been getting in touch, sending your emails in. Thank you for that. And we have Pippa, who says, your interview with barrister Lucy Massoud just now is every reason why I'm so glad GB News came into being and has survived against all the odds, so you can discuss important issues in a way we would never otherwise hear on mainstream news. Absolutely right, Pippa. Thanks for letting us know. I couldn't agree more. Jackie now. Jackie says, wasn't the Northern Ireland Protocol only meant to be temporary until Stormont could vote? There can be no meddling that will affect the Good Friday Agreement or will return to the old divisions and instability that the people of Northern Ireland have to deal with. Does this government not care about Northern Ireland? It's indefensible that Stormont still remains closed. Open it up and start functioning now, or take control from Westminster, or support the reunification of Ireland. Blimey. Lots of suggestions there that I suggest may not solve the issue. Daphne says women in Nottingham should revolt. No, nice and succinct. That would be an interesting thing to see. Paddy says, hi team, no one is talking about abolishing the NIP or ripping it up, as the MSM would tell you. The proposed changes will correct the problems, but Sinn Féin, IRA and the EU don't want that to happen, as both want a united Ireland and to punish the UK for daring to Brexit. I think the phraseology you're using there makes it very clear which side of the debate you are on. Passengers are still facing disruptions as railway strikes continue, affecting millions of people across the country. Today marks day 3, with commuters advised to stay home unless travel is essential. This, of course, isn't ideal for people wishing to join in on the celebrations for Armed Forces Day. Today marked the day the UK celebrates those currently serving or who have served in the military, with a number of events planned around the country. Joining me to discuss this is veteran Steve Masters, a former RAF engineer. Steve, thanks very much for joining me today.
Hi, nice to be here, Andrew.
And to what extent have the celebrations been impacted as a result of these strikes?
Well, to be honest, I don't think they've been impacted that much. Many people would have celebrated Armed Forces Day locally to where they reside, in local towns, villages, etc. In the city, in London itself, people would have been able to cycle to any events and use the buses as well. So I think the hyperbole that was used by MPs from the government earlier in the week, trying to enforce division, is highly disrespectful to members of the armed forces who are serving, members of former members of the services, many of whom work on the railways and the transport network and are probably in the strike action themselves. So I think it's another way of the government to put those seeds of division into the general public without actually really giving the public the true facts.
So your feeling is that the fact that it's Armed Forces Day is just being used as a kind of political tool by the government to sort of say, well, you can't go on strike because you might upset a lot of people while they're attempting to celebrate. Do you think that's what's happened here?
I think that was the motives when Jonathan Gullis spoke on the TV earlier in the week, and he was trying to put a wedge in that area, and we saw a little bit of pushback. Modest amount on social media, but I think overwhelmingly the public, are supporting the strike, not least because many of them are facing the same cost of living challenges that the railway workers, are facing.
But you can appreciate that a lot of people are frustrated, not just because of the lack of inconvenience, but they see the people going on strike that might be earning a lot more than they are, and barristers are even striking, and the teachers. And when teachers strike, of course, the inconvenience there is through the roof, and people's sympathy starts to wane, doesn't it?
I don't think that the sympathy necessarily wanes, with the general public. I think a lot of the media narrative will tell you that the sympathy is not with the strikers, but it's got to be remembered that this is not it's been levelled, and even today I think the Prime Minister has spoken about how high wages are for for train drivers. This is not the train drivers who are on strike at the moment. This is the support workers. This is the ticket office workers. The railway attendants. People who are earning between £20,000 and £30,000 a year. They are, which many of them are below the national average of salaries and haven't seen a decent pay rise in many years.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for joining me tonight. I want to bring my panel in here. Dr. Cassidy, do you have any thoughts about the strikes? The thing about this is as my guest pointed out, the cost of living crisis is affecting everyone. A lot of these strikes, they had forced cuts to their pay during the pandemic, particularly in the flight industry, for instance. You can understand why people have lost patience, shall we say.
Of course I can. The 2 points I want to make. First of all, it seems to be just reading around the general area of strike action and the politics behind that. It seems to be becoming less impactful and less effective now, because the world is changing, social media is changing, and so we have many people now quite happy to work at home. And by doing so, you're reducing your costs, of travelling and stress and anxiety and depression. And so I would be a great advocate for people to work at home if that's what's going to...
It depends where you live. It depends who you live with.
Exactly.
It could escalate your depression.
Of course.
Depending on your spouse.
This morning, I was just coming in by taxi, by the way, and I was navigating all around with the taxi driver, and we thought we're getting lost, And I thought, how on earth, if I was going for a London train, I would want to go home and throw up or something, because, I was just going round and round. I said, it's great if you can commute,
Yeah, it's absolutely hopeless.
Really?
Alice, do you have any thoughts about this? Do you have any sympathy with the strikers?
I do have sympathy, but I think we also have to remember that part of this cost of living crisis is also an unemployment crisis. And many people don't even have jobs. So whilst I do obviously agree, and I am sympathetic towards people who have had cuts to their pay because of inadequate and inefficient government policy, I do also think that these people, to some extent, are even lucky to be employed in the first place and have caused, a lot of kind of chaos and damage in the last few days with the strikes and confusion to our society, which has, I think, made people less sympathetic to their cause.
Well, it's interpreted as being selfish, I suppose, when you put it like that. But isn't it interesting, though, that, Lembit, can I ask you about this? Because, Labour haven't really been supporting the strike.
They can't really say anything, can they? Because
they're called Labour.
They're in the pocket of the union, but they want to appeal to Conservative voters. Keir Starmer's in a big mess on this one.
Right, OK.
The underlying... And I'm happy...
Do they want to appeal to Conservative voters? They're doing a terrible job at it.
Is there such a thing as a Conservative or Labour voter now? They seem to be free-floating.
In the Red Wall, they have to win people who voted Conservative back.
But they've completely abandoned the working class at the same time.
Yeah. Because, I think Keir Starmer's got a massive identity issue for the Labour Party. But a couple of things. You asked me a direct question. They're perfectly entitled to strike. Everyone is. Even if it's inconvenient. Might be counterproductive because various companies saying, actually, if it's going to be this insecure, if we're being told to use public transport but you can't get in, just carry on working from home. And then there's the other point. The whole cost of living crisis wasn't caused by the RMT. No. I believe it's because of ridiculous energy policies which have skyrocketed the cost of energy, which affects just about every cost under the sun. If we got away from the balmy environmental virtue signalling of Boris Johnson's government, and actually, sorry to say, Keir Starmer's government, or potential government, and the Lib Dems, then we could have common sense. Get the oil coming through, get the fracking coming through, bring the prices down, then we don't have 9% inflation, then we don't have this problem.
But of course, I agree. The real strike should be against these ridiculous green taxes.
Yeah.
We are also coming out of a pandemic. We are facing...
Yeah, but that's not the underlying reason. Alice, I'm totally agreeing with you. Let's not pretend the environmental policies are killing the cost of energy in this country. You deal with that, you deal with pretty large proportion of the inflation.
Cassidy, do you agree with Lembit?
Yes, I do. And furthermore, I was just reading there in press this afternoon that Birmingham Airport, by the way, the director of operations, I think was the term, is responsible for all the commuting and so on. 49% of a pay rise. Nick Barton, I think was the name. Current salary £399,000, going up to £595,000.
So this is what annoys people so much, doesn't it? When those at the top of the companies are still earning an awful lot. This is happening quite a lot.
Yeah, it looks bad. But actually, if you add all that money together, it still won't make up for the overall billions that we'd need to get everyone back on a level plan.
On pure PR, though, it does...
It looks bad in PR, but it's kind of the sort of thing I never got into when I was an MP.
Right.
They can have their pay rises, not have their pay rises. It's to do with shareholders and everybody else. Fundamentally, let's stop killing our economy with balmy environmental policies, which underlies this whole problem.
You've made that point very forcefully, Lembit.
I hope so.
You most certainly have. Coming up after the break, does the US need tighter gun control? Join us for that.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking sunny and dry in the east, but much cloudier and windier in the west. Let's delve into the detail. In southwest England, a windy start to the day with gusts of up to 40 miles an hour along coastlines. Dry and sunny for many, though, away from the odd shower along the south coast. In the southeast, it'll be a fresh but sunny start, largely clear skies and dry for all as well, though it will be breezier than Saturday. In South Wales, some more western areas will be quite cloudy first thing, with outbreaks of rain, drier and clearer further east, but very windy for all. And in the northwest of England, a mixed start as well. Parts of Cumbria seeing a rather cloudy and perhaps wet start to the day, but further south, much sunnier and drier, but again windier for all. In northeast England, it should be relatively dry on Sunday morning, though towards southern Scotland it will be a little cloudier with a risk of rain. Cloud and rain affecting many in the central belt of Scotland. The rain will be persistent through the morning and could turn heavy and even thundery at times. In Northern Ireland, overcast and wet as well, lighter winds in the west, but in the east, gusts are expected to reach 45 miles an hour along coastlines. So the rain turning heavy and thundery in the west by lunchtime, remaining largely dry and sunny in the east, and that's how the weather is shaping up during tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's just after 10 o'clock. This is Mark Dolan tonight with me, Andrew Doyle. Coming up, we'll be discussing gun control in the United States. Do they need tougher legislation? In the news agenda, following comments made by Prince Charles yesterday, is it the beginning of the end for the Commonwealth? And why do so many men have so few friends? And discussing those stories and joining me throughout my show are my wonderful panel of former Liberal Democrat MP Len Potopic, political commentator Alice Grant, and royal expert and celebrity psychologist Dr. Arthur Cassidy. And plus tomorrow's papers. That'll be at exactly 10:30 p.m. Find out more shortly, but first, we've got the headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Andrew, thank you. The main story tonight, the Prime Minister has hailed an inspiring and uplifting few days in Rwanda. That comes as the UK announces plans to support marginalised groups abroad and help tackle global challenges. Following a double by-election defeat, Boris Johnson continues to defend his leadership after responding to recent criticisms. And he says voters really want to hear more about the issues that affect them and much less about any mistakes he may have made.
Things are tough. Of course, people are going to rightly going to direct their frustration, their irritation at government and at me. I'm the leader of the government. I think to be absolutely clear, in the last few months, people in Tiverton, people in Wakefield just heard far too much about stuff they didn't want to be hearing about, and not enough about what we want to do to take the country forward.
Well, in other news today, the boss of the RMT has accused the Transport Secretary of talking nonsense after the minister tweeted what he called outdated working practices in the railway industry. Grant Shapps said the strikes are damaging to commuters and the economy, and Mick Lynch hasn't ruled out further industrial action. A fifth of train services were running today on a third day of walkouts this week as thousands of rail workers protested over jobs, pay and conditions. In the United States, President Joe Biden has signed in historic new gun safety legislation. Lawmakers agreed a bipartisan deal following the Texas school massacre and a string of other mass shootings in America. The new measures strengthen background checks for the youngest buyers of weapons and increase funding for mental health and school safety programmes. In Ukraine, the president says his country will win back all the cities it's lost to Russia. That includes the eastern city of Severodonetsk, which has fallen into the hands of Moscow today. In Ukraine's biggest defeat so far, too. In a video address, Volodymyr Zelensky also said Ukraine had been hit by 45 Russian missiles and rockets over the last 24 hours alone. Here, Armed Forces Day has been marked up and down the country, including a display from the RAF's Red Arrows, who took to the skies with this display. If you're watching on television, you can see. Earlier, HMS Prince of Wales returned to Portsmouth Naval Base after completing NATO exercises off the Spanish coast. And again, if you're watching on TV, those were the scenes in Scarborough by the seaside today as veterans marched past the promenade for the thronging crowds there. And the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have marked the day by paying tribute to all who've served their country, both here and abroad. And lastly, Sir Paul McCartney has told the crowd at Glastonbury tonight it was good to be back after playing the opening songs of his headline slot. The former Beatle is making history tonight as the festival's oldest solo headliner, exactly 1 week after celebrating his 80th birthday. Fans started gathering earlier on this afternoon to secure their places at Worthy Farm, ready to watch classic hits from throughout Sir Paul's epic career. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News, where now it's back to Andrew Doyle.
Thanks very much, Polly. It's just after 10 o'clock. This is Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Andrew Doyle. In a few minutes' time, we'll be discussing gun control in the United States and whether or not they need tougher legislation. We'll also be reacting to the tragic shootings in Norway, which the police are treating as acts of terrorism. In the news agenda, following comments made by Prince Charles yesterday, is this the beginning of the end for the Commonwealth? Is there a new war on motorists? And should you fail an exam for wearing a watch? And why do so many men have so few friends? Is it body odour? Who knows? We're going to be discussing all of those stories. And joining me throughout the show are my fantastic panel. I've got former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik, political commentator Alice Grant, and royal expert and celebrity psychologist Dr. Arthur Cassidy. And I want to hear from all of you throughout the show, so keep on emailing in any points of view that you have, any responses to any of the things you've heard. That's gbviews@gbnews.uk. Just get in touch. We're going to read out some of your emails throughout the show. So for the next... United States President Biden has signed the most sweeping gun violence bill in decades, a bipartisan compromise that seemed unimaginable until a recent series of mass shootings, including, of course, the massacre of 19 students and 2 teachers at a Texas elementary school. The legislation will toughen background checks for young gun buyers, keep firearms from domestic violence offenders, and make it easier for authorities to take weapons from problematic people. This will apparently be costing the American taxpayer $13 billion. Now, the UK, of course, has very strict gun regulation. Handguns here have been banned since 1996, and the owners of firearms are subject to very thorough checks. As such, a gun massacre, fingers crossed, very unlikely in the UK. So we have to ask, are these controls enough to preserve lives? So to discuss this tonight, I'm joined by Chief Strategist of Republicans Overseas, Errol Moorcock, and Will Geddes, security expert. Will, I'm going to come to you first. Is it not just simply the case that if we have fewer guns and better controls on guns, there will be fewer murders?
Well, I think in a very simplistic sense, Andrew, yes. I mean, if there are less weapons out there and there are more controls, then yes, inevitably there will be. But to be honest, I don't think it's a question of removing Second Amendment rights or restricting those in any way, but I think it is about controls. And, you know, I've used firearms in my professional life. I'm not opposed to people having firearms, as long as they're suitably managed and they're also in the hands of people that responsibly can hold them and manage them. And I think some of the requirements that President Biden has pushed through aren't that restrictive to legitimate firearms owners. But I think what it will do is prevent firearms necessarily getting into hands of those that are outside of that criminal circle, because the criminal circle will always get their hands on firearms. But it will minimize, hopefully to a certain extent, some of the controls on people that could be seen as a liability, and particularly within active shooters, or especially the profile that generally fits within many of these school shootings.
Errol Moorcock, can I ask you, what do you feel about Joe Biden's response to this?
Well, I mean, his response did have some bipartisan support. Certainly, it's coming from a place that the whole country, regardless of your political affiliation, you know, something needs to happen. I was pretty, inspired to see him looking at the real cause of these school shootings being that 18 to 21-year-old demographic. We have to look at what is an 18-year-old, what is a 19-year-old today. It's not the same cultural environment, you know, and so restricting access to young people who aren't properly trained. I work in the defense industry myself. You know, there's a very serious regimen of training that somebody has to go through to be a certified contractor. I mean, you know, you're letting people access similar weapons. Now, there's a lot of semantics in terms of like semi-automatic weapons and whatnot. So, you know, is it what the NRA wanted to see? No, but is it probably what the middle of the road conservative and the Democrat Party wanted to see? Something, because it's gotten out of hand. It's not just one shooting. It's not just two.
Errol, maybe you can help me with this, because obviously we're speaking here from overseas. We're not in the US. We're not immersed in this debate. And from our perspective, it sometimes feels like any kind of attempt to regulate gun ownership or any movement, such as what we're seeing from Joe Biden now, is interpreted by the NRA and certain conservative groups as just being a horrific threat to their Second Amendment rights. Why is there this knee-jerk reaction all the time to any attempt to improve matters?
I think that's a great point you bring up, and it speaks directly to sort of the gun lobby and their entrenchment in the Republican Party, the old Republican Party, from let's say 1970 until you can even say Trump. Trump was the first Republican candidate back when he ran in 2016 to bring up the fact that, hey, you know, something needs to be done. He said that on stage. He didn't get a lot of fans for it, but you know, you're seeing a change in the Republican Party towards a much more big tent policy. And so, you know, that knee-jerk reaction, the NRA simply doesn't have the pull they used to have. I'm a card-carrying member of the NRA, but I can tell you when I first bought a weapon, there was no training. I was 18 years old. I'm a responsible person. I grew up with firearms. I understand what I'm doing. But simple things like that, where they wouldn't concede that kind of stuff, that's just it's about the people at this point. And things have gotten so polarized, and both parties are using it. You know, you look at where the biggest amount of crimes and murders, well, there's going to be in Democrat-run cities. What's the type of weapon used in most violent crimes? Is a handgun. Handguns are usually for person-to-person interaction, not for, you know, target shooting and whatnot, hunting. You aren't hunting with a handgun unless you're quite talented, we could say. So, I mean, you know, we have a different party, is what I'm trying to say.
But this idea now that even in New York, people will be able to carry firearms without a permit, concealed. I mean, is this? Can I ask you, Will? I mean, isn't this just asking for trouble? I mean, some people have described this as a return to the Wild West, which might be catastrophizing, but you know, there's a point to that, isn't there?
Well, no, not necessarily, because obviously those that are going to be permitted, and New York has had probably the most strictest gun laws of any state in America, certainly from what I have seen. But this element of appeasement, or if you like, relaxing of those laws, are only in the context of someone being able to provide legitimate cause for a proper cause of holding a firearm. Now, when we bear in mind that some of these controls that are in place, some of them are draconian, they will be circumvented by those that are choosing to use it for criminality. But we've also got to consider that the level of threat in America is exponentially increasing. Between 2020 and 2021, I believe it was, or 20 to 2021, there were 345 active shooters. Now, you look at this year alone, there have been 277 school mass shootings that have taken place. Now, you have a commensurate issue. Now, inevitably, for many Americans, they want to protect themselves. But I think some of those measures, those bipartisan measures that Biden has put in, aren't complete. I think there does need to be, and I agree with your other guest here, there has to be mandatory training. And I think that training should be updated on a regular basis, because a vast majority of injuries and fatalities that take place from firearm ownership generally is within the own household. And firearms negligent discharges, if you want to call them, have actually increased beyond fatalities by road crashes, for example, in the United States.
But when it comes to schools, I mean, you're dealing with a very different situation there, and you're a security expert. And I've heard conservative commentators saying that the problem is that there isn't enough sufficient security in schools, that people need to be there to... that feels to me like that's working backwards in a way.
I agree with you. I agree with you entirely. I think you've got to look at the profile, as your other guest was saying, of the individuals that have generally been the perpetrators of mass school shootings. And these have been individuals who've been sub 21 years of age, who have managed to get their hands on a firearm. Now, there should be far stronger controls in place. In certain states, you have to be above 21 years old to get what we would call a long rifle, something like an AK or an AR, but pistols you can get beneath that age. But there needs to be some better controls, certainly on background checks, and also red flagging for individuals that might be suffering from mental illness. And again, this is part of this $15 billion fund, which is going to be attributed to these new laws.
Errol, can I ask you here, I mean, what is it about the USA? Why does it lend itself so much to these kind of catastrophes, particularly among young people and schools? I mean, Canada has guns everywhere, and they don't have these kind of problems at all, it seems.
Yeah, and I give a quick anecdotal example. In the late 60s, early 70s, my mother graduated from high school, and they had a shooting club in the school. You'd bring your rifle to school, you'd lock it in the locker. After you go and train and use it. And none of these things happened. People came home from Vietnam, they brought their weapons. We didn't have the shootings. What we have, people like to say it or not, is a cultural collapse. You have a glamorization of violence in video games and in media. And I'm not saying that causes people who play video games and people who watch violent movies don't go and do this. But you start to combine that with isolation, this rabbit holes that people go down of hate on the internet on both sides, and couple that all with, the fact that there's more medicated people in this country on antidepressants and psychotropic medicine. There's a lot of regulated and unregulated drug use, a lot of marijuana use casually that exacerbates people who are predisposed to some of these more violent things. And when you look at the cultural change, that's really what's happening. You're looking at people who are non-military, 18 to 21, are essentially children. They aren't going out there. The majority of them are not experiencing the real world and the lockdowns for the last 2 years. Not that they caused this, but they're exacerbating this sort of lone wolf situation. So right now we have a cultural failing in our youth. And I mean, you can point to different things here and there, training and whatnot, but honestly, it's depressing to say, how do you fix something that's been on a slippery slope that now is a waterfall of like misery?
Well, an awful lot to think about there. Errol and Will, thanks so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm going to bring my panel in here because I just think, some of the things that Errol was mentioning there's so many factors. He's talking about the potential influence of even video games and violent films, although he was saying there isn't necessarily a causal effect there, but he's talking about psychological problems of people being in lockdown, societal problems. I mean, clearly, though, it's got to be cultural, then, hasn't it? Because, as I said, there are countries with plenty of guns about that don't have these problems.
Let's compare like for like. United Kingdom, we had... These are rough figures, so they're not exact, but to give you an idea. About 600 homicides a year, roughly. Now, if you factor that up to the size of the population in America, that'd be 3,000 homicides a year. In America, roughly 20,000 people are shot dead in homicides every year, and then there's an even larger proportion who commit suicide with guns. So it's disproportionately great. It's not just because it's a bigger country. And the second thing here is, quite obviously, the gun culture is facilitating this. about 35 people were shot dead in Britain. That would factor up to about 175 if we had the population of America.
Yeah.
20,000 murders with guns. Obviously, there's something seriously wrong. But you mentioned it, Second Amendment. There is this fundamental, profound right to bear arms, and that's constitutional.
So this is what I really want to get to. I mean, Alice, can you help me through this? Because I've tried my best to sort of engage with the pro-gun view in America and to understand where they're coming from. The arguments that keep coming back to me are things like, what if the government becomes tyrannical and we have to be able to protect ourselves under those circumstances? Is that really what's behind all this?
So I think, yeah, I am almost sympathetic to the kind of the view of, you know, their want for liberty, but ultimately, as it is perfectly clear, the American people are just simply not responsible enough to have guns at this point to the extent in which they have them now. How many more school shootings do we need to witness? I mean, already we're in the hundreds. We could get to one for each day of the year at this point. And I think that it is, as you know, we've spoken about today, an immense societal issue at root here. And that's not going to change if something really, in a massive cultural shift doesn't happen. So
but it's so difficult, isn't it? Because we don't really know what that cultural problem is or how to diagnose it or certainly how to fix it. Dr. Cassidy, do you have any thoughts on this?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, you just said something quite important there, Andrew, and Haslempik and Ellis. There is an exponentially increase in the level of threat throughout all cultures in America. And I feel what we have to do is to try and look again at the amendment. And this is where the crux of the matter is. I mean, you know, there is that freedom to possess arms, but it has to be a public health issue and a multidimensional approach to how do we know what are the most appropriate questions to ask here.
Well, that's the problem, though, is when you're talking about constitutional issues, the Constitution to Americans is so sacrosanct. Yeah. And so that's why it feels like a threat. But of course, you know, it dates from a time where they didn't have these sort of self-reloading machine guns and that kind of thing. It's a different world, isn't it?
I mean, to have a written constitution in itself, you know, I mean, obviously we don't have that kind of codified constitution here, you know, was going to obviously be problematic in the long term because if this is supposed to last, you know, for hundreds of years, it has to be perennial in some sort of way, and it simply isn't. It does obviously reflect the cultural and the political status of that time. So we are now, as you know, it's clear, in very different times when there is an immense problem with the youth in America, and it is just obviously out of control.
But it sets a dangerous precedent, doesn't it? If you say, well, times have changed, so we need to modify the Constitution, well, who's to say that someone won't say, well, let's modify the First Amendment then, because times have changed and speech is clearly dangerous now.
There's been a huge debate, which has been covered in GBNews, about abortion rights, and you can see that they take it very seriously. The reason I don't think that's going to fix it is back to Northern Ireland. Arthur and I grew up there. There's quite a lot of guns there, a lot of violence there, but I think Arthur probably felt the same. I certainly have never felt in danger walking around that somebody would pull a gun on me in some random way. So psychologically, even in the most troubled part of the United Kingdom for 35 years, you didn't have this undisciplined, random run amok. A few cases, yes, but nothing like the kind of violence you see in America.
But then the NRA would argue that when you have instances of mass shootings, attempted mass shootings, if someone is armed and present, they can put an end to it before too many lives were lost. I mean, we saw in Texas, someone attempted a massacre in a church. They were down in about a minute, and they could have killed dozens. Is there a case for that?
Well, there is. I mean, I feel that, you know, having witnessed, you know, throughout the troubles in Northern Ireland, you know, we grew up to become almost immune to the tragedy, you know, that was going on day after day. And it was embarrassing even to say that we'd become immune to this because lives were lost. These were people, innocent people, bloodshed. I remember as a young boy, you know, a massive Oxford Street bomb going off in Belfast. And I was with my mother at the time there, and, you know, this massive 500-pound IRA bomb had gone off. It wasn't expected. But I remember talking to politicians later on who had been there and said they'd just seen bodies lying everywhere, trauma. These were policemen still suffering 30 years after this for post-traumatic stress disorder, fear and anxiety. They'd never recover for this, many of them, you know. And so I can really empathise with what's going on here. And by the way, I was just looking at the Telegraph there today and the Guardian, the Independent. I saw a photograph there of a young school teacher who was ready, pistol loaded, and when I read through that few paragraphs, it made the comment verbatim, you know, this was being trained. If you see someone there that you think is going to shoot your children, you shoot.
I mean,
and you kill.
that to me is just terrifying. I mean, people have seriously recommended arming teachers in the US, and it's just so culturally alien to me. I just can't even get my head around that. Anyway, we've got to go to a break now. Coming up in the news agenda, following comments by Prince Charles yesterday, we'll be talking about whether or not this is the end of the Commonwealth. And we're also going to be asking why so many men have so few friends. So if you're a man watching at home, alone, probably, you won't want to miss it. See you in a minute.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Andrew Doyle, and you've been sending your emails in. We're going to read out a few of those now. We've got one from Den here. Hello, Den. The protocol allows for revision where it is found to be detrimental to any of those involved. Boris Johnson was desperate to get Brexit over the line and agreed a deal, expecting that it could be revised when its obvious shortcomings were exposed upon implementation. Interesting. Mark now. Northern Ireland is more trouble than it's worth. Blimey, what a statement. We'll see United Ireland in the next 30 years. Never. Goodness me. Aaron now. Aaron says, the protocol was a hurried agreement. We have nothing to fear from the EU. It must be abolished to free Northern Ireland. Do you mean the EU must be abolished to free Northern Ireland?
I agree.
Quite drastic. It's time now for the news agenda, where we're going to discuss today's big stories and tomorrow's headlines. And to discuss this, we have former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik, royal expert and celebrity psychologist Dr. Arthur Cassidy, and political commentator Alice Grant. So the Prince of Wales has openly backed former British colonies who want to cut ties with the monarchy. He addressed Commonwealth leaders in Rwanda yesterday, many of whom wish to ditch the royal family. The future king said that each member's constitutional arrangement, as republic or monarchy, is purely a matter for each member country to decide. So what does this mean? So, Dr. Cassidy, isn't it strange that the royal family of all people, or Prince Charles, as one of its major figureheads, is the one who's sort of doing his own side down a little bit there, isn't he?
He does, but Prince Charles knows in his own mindset at the moment the type of monarchy that he will undertake, you know? So I'm not quite convinced that he really has got the recipe right for how these people may well transition into republicanism, into Republican sort of culture. And I think one of the major issues that Parliament has to face, and certainly that the Palace has got to face, is really how do we do this sensitively and empathically with respect for the culture of these people.
Do you think that Prince Charles is maybe a bit nervous that he's not a popular figure in the way the Queen was around the globe? I mean, he's not, is he?
Well, I mean, things like this, statements like these, is contributing to this unpopularity.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's kind of unbelievable for obviously the successor to the throne to actively undermine something that the Queen has been working towards her whole life.
Because she cares so much about it, doesn't she?
Of course. I mean, to do this is actually incredibly insensitive, and I'm really quite shocked at Prince Charles at this point.
Lembit, do you agree?
I'm a big fan of Prince Charles. Disagree with him on environment. Everything else I think is good. Think about
do you talk to plants
all he
as well?
talks about is in the environment.
Who else do I have? But we'll come back to friendships
We'll come back to that later, yeah.
Think about the opposite. Imagine if he'd said, "Oh, the arrangements are purely a matter for me to decide." Then everyone would go crazy.
That's a good impersonation, though. I'll give you that.
That's a very good impersonation, but it is also about respect for the office and respect for what the Queen has been working for decades. She's given her life to this, her life to the Commonwealth.
He can't simply
He's just
say...
gone and just actively undermined everything she's been doing for decades.
He stated the obvious. He can't say, you can bog off if you want to leave. I'm going to tell you what to do. That would be the alternative.
No, but there's a way,
there's
a way to say nothing about it.
But
There's a way to say, we can be respectful to those to these.
Yeah, but I think he's
and their views. But ultimately, this does boil down to what the people want.
Yeah,
and generally, the people love the British monarchy. The British monarchy is a symbolic thing.
He's playing a
Dr.
clever game.
Do you want to come in, because there's a lot of disagreement here with the other two panelists?
I agree really with what Alice is saying. Sorry, Olympic. I take Olympic's point. I agree really with what Alice is saying here, simply because the monarch is a monarch, and she will know what she wants Charles to do. And the great respect, many of these people do really want to withhold that monarchical link to Great Britain and to the United Kingdom. And so I think we have to look at this in balance, that definitely, I mean, many of these people thrive on monarchy. They love the Queen, they love the royal family, and all of this grandeur and the pomp and the ceremony. They love that. We might not, but
maybe
they do.
it might be unpopular with the political class, but I think with the people, this is something unifying.
Lembit's desperate to get in, but I do have to cut you in there because it is 10:30, so it is time to look at tomorrow morning's newspapers. Hot off the press. So tomorrow's Daily Star has attendees at Wimbledon are asked not to have romps in the woods. No balls, please, is the headline there. And Simon Cowell is apparently bringing back the X Factor just when we thought we got away with it. Anyway, The Observer top stories. PM's plan for a third term is branded delusional. They've also got Greta at Glastonbury there, and a Conservative donor is given top role in selecting honours. Sunday Telegraph now. Boris Johnson is apparently planning to bring in steel tariffs and break WTO rules to win back Red Wall voters. And Prince Charles calls on slavery to be taught as widely as the Holocaust in schools. Crackdown on militant unions is the headline of the Sunday Express, as the Attorney General pledges to take on left-wing radicals. And Boris Johnson says he is going nowhere and claims he will win 2 elections. Well, he would say that, wouldn't he? And Sunday People now has gone in a completely different direction and leads with, I quit for Colleen, as Wayne Rooney says he resigned as manager of Derby County for the sake of his wife, Colleen. I think that's probably a very sweet story, but I don't really know who any of those people are. Not my area at all. So, panel, let's just have a look at this Red Wall story, because the Prime Minister imposing steel tariffs. This is an attempt, and people are accusing him again of breaking international laws. This seems to be a theme. But, can he regain this red... I mean, they're talking here to win back Red Wall in the headline. It's in the past tense, almost as though the Red Wall, that he's got to, has he lost the support that he gained?
Yes, I lost my seat in 2010. Didn't mean to lose, but I did. So
it happens.
I can speak with authority about this. I can see the signs.
Really?
Yeah, when you lose that momentum with your constituents, it's really hard to win it back. His constituents are the whole country. Now, millions of people don't really give a damn about Partygate. Millions of people love to go for a pint with him. But the reality is he's lost enough for even the, in my view, fairly weak Labour leader, Keir Starmer, to gain those seats back because it was a personality vote.
It was always, Alice, it was always very precarious, wasn't it? Insofar as the people who voted for Boris Johnson in those traditional Labour heartlands, it must have been like cutting off a limb to do so. They must have really been gritting their teeth while they did it. So it was always possible that they would flip back.
Well, indeed. And I think it was such a historic thing to have so many Red Wall voters turn to the Conservative Party. And honestly, Boris really should have honoured that vote and should have really, tried his best to fulfil all his promises. And the issues, really, which he's been neglecting are the ones which are the most important to the British people. These are cultural issues. It's, this wokeness that we've seen in our schools, in our British institutions, which Labour voters, or, previous Labour voters in the Red Wall are really unhappy about. And instead of this, he's been banging on about the Green Revolution. He's been locking us down for now the last 2 years almost over the pandemic. honestly, it's just been a waste of a premiership, which could have been so, fantastically, almost revolutionary in unifying people from across the political spectrum.
Is it possible, Dr. Cassidy? I mean, he did say when he won, he said, you've lent us your vote. He recognised that these voters had lent their votes to him. Is it a bit desperate now? He's trying this idea of imposing steel tariffs. Is it too little, too late?
Well, I believe he will go on. I mean, I'm looking deeply into what's happening here within his mindset and personality traits. And I've written about this for several years. I mean, he's driven by these power motives, driven by Churchillian politics, driven by that Churchillian, so I will beat and I will kill beaten people till I really get this whole political situation.
Are you saying this in your capacity as a psychologist? You're looking into his mind here, his personality. You can see this in his behaviour, can you?
I do. I mean, we have to analyse discourse analysis, and we have to look at the narrative and the motives that are driving this. And he is very much driven, as a classical scholar, into Churchillian politics, and we both know that.
Do you mean by power, by his own sense of power and importance?
Exactly. There's a form of healthy narcissism here, which he utilises very effectively, but not exclusively. If he knows I'm going to go for A, he will go for A.
Right.
But he'll also have a plan for B.
So is this why he won't take responsibility for anything? The very idea of him standing down after the by-election defeat, it seemed a total anathema to him.
Exactly.
It wouldn't even be possible for him to contemplate it.
Exactly. I don't think he could cope with standing down, particularly. They haven't, but I don't. He's driven. This man is driven as a prime minister. He will achieve what he wants to achieve, irrespective of the consequences.
Do you think they're just going to root him out now at this point?
Well, you know what? Boris Johnson, I believe, is really the best of the bunch at the moment, which is saying something about our political climate at the moment.
Yeah.
But I really believe that I think there is still a chance that he could really win back these voters if he truly tried. And it would be about abolishing green levies and truly just empowering the British people.
Do you think the Lib Dems are now more of a threat to I mean, they won a huge swing in the by-election.
Sabina, mum of my kids, thinks that the Remain vote could help the Lib Dems because Brexit, we've already talked about what a pig's ear has been made of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Maybe the Lib Dems can capitalise on it. I'm not so convinced.
Right.
Having said that, the Lib Dems are winning by default. They had a tremendous result in the by-election. In fact, the most impressive by-election result in British political history. But if the Tories junk Boris and get a more popular leader, and we could debate who that might be, then that advantage may go away again. I can't take it away from the Dems. They did a great result.
But the by-election result, I mean, often with by-elections, it's often a protest, and it's often a protest against the leader. Is this a message that people are saying, get rid of him at this point?
It is. The result was so intense. Not so much in Wakefield. I actually think it wasn't a great result. Stummy won, but he was bound to, really. It's such a big result for the Lib Dems. The Tories must seriously now be thinking, lots of us are going to lose to the Lib Dems because we're not the Boris party. Boris knows, everybody knows, that he's not being a vote winner at the moment, and that's really bothering the backbench.
So let's have a quick look at this one on Priti Patel. Priti Patel is in trouble again. According to the Mirror, she's broken the law again over her treatment of asylum seekers. And this is to do with this is a High Court ruling that has suggested that housing refugees in shoddy barracks in Kent until 2026 was in breach of the Equality Act. And, of course, this is off the back of her Rwanda policy. There's a pattern developing here, isn't there?
It doesn't penetrate. It's complicated. In the realpolitik, it's hard to explain it to people.
OK.
I think that she probably has done this. Obviously, I'm not in the High Court. But I don't think it really damages her very much.
No, I think the more the media kind of try to demonise her and the left go hysterical over every single move she makes, I think it's actually going to increase her popularity.
It's not just the left, though, now, is it? I mean, we had the European Court of Human Rights the other day vetoing her Rwanda deportation policy. Now we've got the High Court here. No, sure, and that's not a British court. But now we've got the High Court here. So it's not just lefties on Twitter going a bit mad. It's the judiciary.
No, that is understandable, but of course I think to the average British voter, she will still be someone who's more aligned to their own political beliefs than, the upper echelons of our political class.
So you think in a way that she's almost coming across as she's a fighter?
Yeah, I think, we need a bit of that in our politics, to be honest, as well, because otherwise what else do we have apart from, shallow corporatists and not very inspiring political figures?
Arthur, are you a fan of Priti Patel?
Well, look, there are several issues here. Yes, I am. But look, I will qualify that by saying, look, Asylum seekers, how do you define an asylum seeker? How legitimate is an asylum seeker? I do know from my own profession that many of these asylum seekers are coming, they're presenting with mental health difficulties. Now, in order to actually put a number of these people in Rwanda, in a beautiful place, are they being treated effectively there? What's actually happening in this processing? What is actually being processed?
Well, that was one of the concerns of the European Court of Human Rights.
Yeah.
They were concerned about the conditions, the safety conditions.
We appreciate their concerns, but I think our domestic and home policy should be a British thing.
I suppose something has to be done. I mean, you raise an important point about whether they're asylum seekers, whether they're economic migrants, but in either case, you can understand why they would want to come here. But it's true, isn't it, Lemmy, that if she doesn't get a hold of this issue, it could be the thing that sinks her.
Yeah, the biggest... Well, I don't think it will sink her. There's a contradiction there, and there's a bit of a distasteful one. The people who object to the Rwanda policy are effectively saying Rwanda's a bad place to go.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
At the same time as the government is saying, if you come here, we'll send you to Rwanda because it's a bad place to go. Both sides are saying Rwanda's a bad place to go. Actually, it's a first world country. So both sides are playing the same, essentially racist game against Rwanda.
When they think of Rwanda, they think of the Tutsis and the Hutus and the massacres, and they don't. Their mind is stuck, and it is a kind of stereotyping.
Well, let's talk about mafficking then. How far back do you want to go? Right. Rwanda is a different
world country,
now.
exactly. And from her point of view, of course, I mean, the argument that she makes, which I think is a persuasive one, is there is an intention here. Whatever you think of Priti Patel, there is an intention to stop the people traffickers. To say if people know that when they get here and they've paid these exploitative people however much money, that they'll just be sent on somewhere else, it might help to curb that criminality. I mean, is there a point to that?
A very big one, because are we importing criminality and what level? And what moral obligation do we have if people are coming as migrants? Do we have a moral obligation besides a legal obligation to treat them effectively, to treat them as humans? And, I mean, what will that cost the taxpayer?
But we do have to have human sympathy at the end of the day. We are dealing with human beings.
No, it is ultimately a very moral issue, and I think human trafficking is one of the most disgusting trades in the world right now, which just is being completely avoided by most politicians. So I think the fact that she's trying to tackle this head on and actually look at the real issue here, which is the exploitative and depraved trade of human trafficking, is something really noble, which should be applauded.
Right, well, lots to think about there. We do have to move on now. A man has been arrested and charged with murder, attempted murder and terrorist acts after a shooting in the centre of Norway's capital, Oslo. 2 people were killed and 21 injured, 10 of them seriously. And this was outside a popular gay bar within the gay community. And, of course, it was on the day that Oslo's gay community was due to celebrate its annual Pride Parade. Police say they consider this attack an act of extreme Islamist terrorism. So that we have to be a bit careful here. We don't know at this stage all of the details. There's now speculation about whether the man in question had mental illness issues, but he was an Islamist. He was on a watch list for radical Islamist behaviour. So there's that. And we come back to this issue of, and I'm sure this will reignite this debate about this conflict of rights, as in there are certain cultural groups which tend to foster anti-gay sentiment, and that this can create all sorts of tensions. Do you think that's a risk here?
The biggest risk is we try by media, and we mustn't do that.
Right.
2 things to say about Norway. This is so rare.
Yes.
When it happens in Norway, it makes massive headlines. If we're talking about America, this would register on the scale for a day or 2, but that would be about it. It would be a minor mass shooting for America. Second point is this. We still don't understand how to integrate countries with ethnic groups. My parents came here from Estonia. That's why I'm called Lembitopek. They worked very hard to integrate because they were grateful for the chance of not being sent back to the Soviet Union, where they'd been liquidated. But they made the effort to do that.
But it must be difficult. I mean, I speak to friends in Sweden, and they talk about how there are gangs there who are still just culturally mired in another country's culture.
And that happens in this country too.
Yeah.
We just haven't worked out integration. It happens organically, but we don't really try.
I would say integration for this particular community, because, like your story as well, my mother's from Peru. She has integrated so perfectly into British society, partly because of her willing to get behind Britain, to be a patriot for this nation, and to be grateful and appreciative of every opportunity which this country offers its people. And I think the particular problem, sadly, in this case, is the Islamic community's complete inability to really get with the LGBT community.
Well, there's an interesting point.
Yeah.
When Trevor Phillips took on his very comprehensive survey of this and found that a majority, over 50% of the people that he polled, felt that being gay ought to be illegal in this country. Now, and it was only a small majority, 51, 52%. It's still a majority. Now, that kind of thing. But it was brushed off as Islamophobic to raise this. But that's surely an issue.
Back to the free speech point we began with this evening. People should have the right to say it, but we have to debate it.
Yeah.
This is why, I know I'm going right back to an hour and a half ago, that's why we have to be able to let people say these things in an open debate, rather than simply saying, you will shut up. That doesn't change anyone's point of view. Maybe that's one of the problems, Alice, because these individuals don't integrate, because they don't get the chance to say what we might say are objectionable views.
But pretending that there isn't a problem of homophobia within the Muslim community is just wrong, and really bad, by the way, for gay Muslims. I mean, a really catastrophic situation for them. So more discussion, not less, Dr. Cassidy?
Yes, so there does need to be more intelligent discussion, basically, to understand identity. And, I mean, I've had two particular individuals from that community in my mental health work. And the more we dig deep, I think they appreciate the fact that we listened.
Yes.
And I think we have to spend a lot of time listening and trying to understand, basically, how these mental health difficulties come around. By the way, one informed me about another person that he knew in his home country who had been radicalised. And there's been a lot of psychiatric research, by the way, carried out here in London with regards to young boys, Islamic guys, who's part of the brain, the amygdala, which is very ripe for radicalisation. Now, those young people, I'm told, by Islamic psychiatrists, that these people go on to actually become very, very fearful when they're asked to go out and carry out a bombing mission. So they're highly vulnerable, and many of those people feel, look, like I'm going to lose my life if I don't do this. So you have an incredibly profound psychological issue, moral and legal issue here with regards to how do we, and just noting here, a suspected radicalised Islamist, a history of mental illness. Now, how do we define those people? How do we identify them? And how do we treat them in the community?
It goes back to the problem we were talking about with the school shootings earlier, isn't it? How do we identify the potential risks, the people who might have been radicalised and who might go on to commit these absolutely appalling atrocities? Anyway, we must go to a break now. After the break, why do men have so few friends? And plus our great British game show. Tonight, it is called A Biden With Me. I'll see you after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Andrew Doyle. And you've been getting in touch. You've been sending your emails in. We've got a few now. Brenda says, good show as usual, Andrew. You hit the nail on the head and are always fair. Thank you. And Brenda, I will send you your £5 note in the post. Brian says, the protocol isn't working, so what is the problem with changing it? And Anna says, glad you're bringing up the Commonwealth tonight, as I'd like to ask if we are encouraging any other countries to apply to join. We have something quite special. I feel it's about time we used it to our mutual benefit. What a lovely sentiment. Author Max Dickens has proposed to his girlfriend and soon realised he didn't have anyone to be his best man. So he found himself asking the question, why do so many men have so few friends? And he's publishing a book on this very subject. This is due to be released on July the 7th. And it begs the question, is it the case? Lembit, so have you got many friends? Or are we it?
Well, Matt Dickens isn't my friend.
Right, OK.
I suspect this is about him rather than the rest of us. I don't have your technical background and identity, but I'd say this is a load of tosh.
Interesting.
Because you go to the pub and you speak to people and they can be your friends.
But we don't know this man, or do you know? You don't know him personally,
so we don't. Well, obviously nobody does.
Alice, is this a particular thing about men, do you think, or do you, I mean...
To be honest, I just think this is ridiculous. Men get along so easily with other men, and they bond over football, they bond over like all sorts of stuff so quickly. As I think women, we just kind of wonder how is it that men are so brotherly and fraternal.
It's harder for men like me who aren't interested in football, because you try bonding over origami, it doesn't really... People aren't interested.
You'll find a community, Andrew.
Yes, sometimes. I mean, you come from a psychologist background. You know about this stuff, don't you, Dr. Cassidy?
Well, I'm like you. You know, I mean, I'm not a football follower. OK. But I find my enjoyment doing my mental health work, but that's only part of it.
Yes.
Ex-hockey player, you know, I find a lot of guys will bond together. By the way, I remember giving a seminar paper on bromance. And we were talking about bromance, you know, talking about... Now, where does that whole celebrity culture thing come from? By the time I was working on many years ago in Big Brother, you know, I observed a number of technical camera crew sitting around having a coffee, and I might be chatting about, what do you guys talk about? Oh, we talk about football, but we talk about anything but our emotions. Yeah. And women will talk as well.
Well, isn't that right, Alice? I mean, so you know, men do traditionally struggle with talking about emotions, and isn't that a sort of key aspect of being a close friend? Maybe men just have more superficial friends and women have more close friends, or is that not right either?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's very kind of almost biological. Men find it also biologically more difficult to cry, for example. Like there are some types.
Is that not just socialisation? Is that not just when a boy cries, the mother says, "Oh, man up"?
No, genuinely, they find it harder to cry.
Really?
Yes, yeah, for sure. And I just think in this case, you know, I don't think that should be an obstacle to forming friendships. Obviously, emotional connection is a deep part of relationships, but shouldn't be.
Yeah,
you know.
I'm not so sure that this author is correct in his thesis.
It's tosh.
Hasn't he just accidentally outed himself as being a not very popular person?
He's accidentally advertised a book that he wants us all to buy.
And I tell you what, here we are talking about it. So that's a book by Max Dickens. Do check that out. I haven't read it, but I'm sure it's all right. Anyway, let's move on now. We've now got our quiz. This is our Great British Game Show. And what we thought we'd do this week is we'll look at gaffe-prone US President Joe Biden. He struck again after cameras caught a glimpse of his cue cards that gave him these very basic instructions. We can just see them there on the screen. And this was when he was speaking to the press. And the instructions included things like saying hello to guests, sitting down, and exactly which journalist to take questions from. You is also written in block capitals. So you need to sit down now. You need to do this. It is embarrassing. So we couldn't resist going back some of Joe Biden's worst gaffes, but let's see if you can guess what happened next. So this is a game called A Biden With Me. Here's the first clip.
Oh, I know.
Lembit knows it.
I think he shook hands with his imaginary friend.
He did.
Let's have a look.
Did he? Did he actually?
He did.
There he is. He turns away, goes to shake. Oh, no one is there. No, it's such a shame.
Men really do have friends.
Mr. Dickens didn't show up.
There we go.
Comedians.
We've all got imaginary friends, but we don't do that in front of the press, do we? No. Let's move on to another one. We've got another one now.
I know again.
Because
please, sir.
Now, Lembit knows again, but let's see if either the other two. Alice?
I'm not sure.
Dr. Arthur? No? What do you think he did? OK, Lembit, you're going to have to put them out of their misery.
What were you going to say?
I think guess maybe he stumbles.
Stumbles.
He falls over.
Yeah, he falls over.
Yes, I think he falls over more than once. Let's have a look.
He just... Cringing, this man's got his finger on the nuclear button.
No, that's actually making me feel so bad.
And you do feel sorry for him, don't you?
Yeah.
OK, let's have another clip. Let's see what we've got.
Great job. God, lovely. How are you?
OK. Does anyone know what happens here? This became
I
quite
almost don't want
famous.
to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrible to watch, but, you know, we're trying to play the quiz, so what do you think he could have done at this point?
It's going to be something typically creepy.
Like what?
Something creepy? You mean sniffing hair? That kind of thing. He does that quite a lot, doesn't he?
He kissed her.
Well, he's already done that. OK, let's see what he actually does. Let's see what happens.
Calls her his wife.
Great job. God, lovely. How are you? Hey, everyone. I'm Joe Biden's husband.
Biden's husband.
Yes,
yes, he just described himself as Joe Biden's husband. That's
tricky.
Now, look, I should say
that's
all of this.
tricky.
You need a psychological analysis.
Oh, no, yeah.
Well,
what
you're
do you
right
think
there,
about that?
Yeah.
What, if you're starting to describe yourself as
Your
Joe
own
Biden's husband,
spouse.
what does that suggest psychologically speaking?
Nervous anxiety?
Oh, as simple as that. See, this is the thing about this, you know, I feel a bit bad in a sense because it feels sometimes that this is someone who's suffering from cognitive decline, but he's the president of the United States and his office and administration is denying that and saying that's absolutely not the case.
It's actually really tragic and almost abusive.
Yeah. What do you think, Lambert?
It would be like saying, well, let's give this guy a chance to be a pilot even though he's got vertigo.
Yes,
or somebody who's rabid, the chance to be a sailor. Lovely guy. Not suited for this particular job.
Let's give
I'm sorry to say.
Well, let's give another example. Let's watch this one.
Brock and I think it's a right.
OK, do you know that one? This one went viral as well. Let's watch the full thing.
Brock and I think it's a right for people to have bad health care.
I don't know what he said there. He's inventing his own words. But then, of course, Donald Trump invented kofefe, didn't he? So maybe this is just a thing that presidents do.
But you sort of feel Trump arrogantly thought that would be a real word, and we're talking about now. I just don't think Biden's all there.
You know what? I think Trump was drunk when he said that to me.
Really? No, he doesn't drink at all.
He doesn't drink?
Trump is completely teetotal.
Really?
Absolutely teetotal.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
We might have time for just one more. Just one more.
Because of the actions we've taken, things have begun to change.
And what does he say next? Any ideas, Alice? No? No, people don't.
Is it inflation?
Nobody else.
Praising
inflation?
Okay,
Lembit thinks inflation. Let's watch it.
Praising inflation.
Because of the actions we've taken, things have begun to change. End of quote.
End of quote. Off the auto cue. God love him. Anyway, look, we've got to go. Thanks for watching tonight. Headliners is up next. I'll be hosting. Join us just in a few minutes for that. And see you next week.
Looking ahead to tomorrow's weather, and the UK is looking sunny and dry in the east, but much cloudier and windier in the west. Let's delve into the detail. In southwest England, a windy start to the day with gusts of up to 40 miles an hour along coastlines. Dry and sunny for many, though, away from the odd shower along the south coast. In the southeast, it'll be a fresh but sunny start, largely clear skies and dry for all as well, though it will be breezier than Saturday. In South Wales, some more western areas will be quite cloudy first thing, with outbreaks of rain, drier and clearer further east, but very windy for all. And in the northwest of England, a mixed start as well. Parts of Cumbria seeing a rather cloudy and perhaps wet start to the day, but further south, much sunnier and drier, but again, windier for all. In northeast England, it should be relatively dry on Sunday morning, though towards southern Scotland,